I really don't see any other explanation why you give up the rook for just a pawn on e6.
Yeah.
We choose to analyze the game of Alexander Predke and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. David, what happened here?
All right. So Predke came into Vachier's famous Najdorf Sicilian with an unexpected move, Queen F3, and he managed to make Maxime think a little bit about it. And so I thought, promising start. He found a variation that maybe Maxime doesn't know as well, hasn't prepped recently. Maybe there's some room to outplay the opponent here. But what quickly developed actually was that Predke just was not actually that confident how to play the position himself. He started getting behind on time within just a couple moves here, sort of normal moves from both players. And he chose the plan of going for F4, which didn't make any sense. He spent 15 minutes on this move, King B1. And there's kind of two stories to how this game goes badly for him. One is time usage, which I usually think is associated with confidence. And the other could be that, he didn't know what to do with this position, but they sort of come together. It's either confidence or knowledge of the position, but he goes for F4 and E5 right here. Something that looks complicated, but honestly, it's just not very good, is it?
It is not very good. And all these things started when White actually played F4. Instead of this, we were hoping that he would go for F3 to maintain the center really strong here, to guard the pawn on E4, and then to push the pawn on G4, G5. However, here Maxime Vachier-Lagrave was very smart to keep the king in the center, not castled, not allowed White to have the king side attack, and also to be very, very active on the queen side. Because after this moves B5, rook C8, it created a lot of danger. And for instance, after move F3, there was a move B4, which was winning a knight, and this knight was stuck here on SC3 thanks to King B1, which we considered not to be the best option for White. But besides this knight trap, there was several positions where Black was also hitting the knight on C3, and there was quite typical sacrifice here in Sicilian when you just break down the queen side pawn structure and then try to play on the dark squares. But all this was unnecessary, as White here made really, really weird decision to play F4 first, allow knight to jump on G4, and then E5. But this is just the start of the interesting and exciting position.
And even
Maxime.
here, I mean, E5 is kind of the logical follow-up to F4, but it was so bad that White would have been better off just, retreating the bishop and keeping the game going in some other way. But this is the follow-up. It leads to this trade. And then to get back the pawn that's sacrificed, White takes on H6, developing Black's rook and giving up the nice bishop. And at this point, Vachier has inevitability on his side. If the game goes to an endgame, Black wins. If White doesn't come up with some kind of tactic in the middle game, Black wins. So it's just really tough against the bishop pair and the nice protected passed e-pawn. It's very tough to play for White. And Vachier did an interesting maneuver bringing his queen active. This worked out really well, although it was pretty tricky to figure out. So they activated their rooks. He offered a queen trade, which of course White doesn't want.
Yes, David, in this position, for those players who are not very familiar to Sicilian defense and they play some other openings, they might consider that White has here some counterplay for this exchange of the center to the side. But in fact, King on E8 is very safe. It's not under attack. And in fact, if we get the endgame, it's even closer to be in the center and support this pawn. And also we were talking about this position during the commentary, as not very often Black gets pair of bishop and the center in Sicilian, as it is really sharp opening, and usually White is the one who fires the whole board.
Yeah. So white played a4, which, I mean, doesn't help white too much. Vachier took his king off of the central file. They made a trade. G3, which doesn't end up helping white either, because after black puts pressure on the knight, black finally got the queen trade that they wanted to. And here queens came off the board. And Vachier plays bishop f3. And this is kind of a critical moment for the game as well, although I think that whatever white did, black would probably end up winning the game. But normal would be to play knight takes f3, rook takes f3, and then grovel with opposite colored bishops, hoping for some kind of a miracle draw. Instead, Predke hoped for a miracle tactic with rook e6, and we couldn't quite figure out what.
We did. There was only one line with a beautiful checkmate. Let's show that, David.
So Keti thinks that the dream that made Predke play like this was the dream of Vachier walking the king to g6.
Exactly. And after king g6, although this is the only move who loses the game, there is a beautiful checkmate on f7. And if you agree with me, you can put down in the comments that you agree with me right after watching this recap.
Say, Keti was
otherwise,
right.
I really don't see any other explanation why you give up the rook for just a pawn on e6.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. I mean, maybe he could have hallucinated something because he was so low on time, right? He could have imagined something a little bit weird, but he played rook e6. MVL picked this rook. We're pretty certain that he could have taken either rook and won the game. I don't think the variation was sound in either direction, but here there was a very, very important move. I think probably the only move to conveniently win this position for black was bishop c2, saving the rook from knight f5, because king e7, knight f5, gets all your rooks eaten, and a slower move like rook f1, white has time to play rook takes f7 check, right? And white is kind of in the game. They can always cover their king with knight c1, and they've got good compensation for an exchange here. 2 pawns already, and the black king in bad shape. So important move from Vachier was bishop c2. And then there's either going to be rook f1 check, or in the game, rook c5 check. And then he can capture the rook on e7 because there's no longer a rook hanging on f5. And from here, it was just mop up.
Yeah. Very likely this whole tactic starting from rook e6 sacrifice was mixed by bishop c2 intermediate move there, and it is worth to mention that Predke had at this point only 1 minute on the clock, and he still had to play several more moves. So he really tried his best. He saw some tactics there, and he went for it. Unfortunately, it did not work out, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave had more time on the clock, so he could use this time to find the proper way to get out of these traps that Predke made. And in the end, we had the position where white sacrificed to exchange, which in practice is just impossible to save. And it was just a matter of a few more moves from both players, right?
Yeah, I like the last move that Maxime played as well, which is they'd gotten to this position, and the white pieces have kind of surrounded this rook and trapped this one rook. So I don't know that Maxime had 100 different ways to win here, but there's probably a couple. But I like that the plan was that he saves the trapped rook with this sacrificing move of the rook that's not trapped, but it creates a funny geometry where he collects all the white pieces. Like Predke resigned here, but if knight takes, then rook takes, and the king can't get back and defend each of these, right? And if knight d4, then say knight c6, and no white piece can defend on d4. So it's a kind of funny little unusual tactic here with rook g4 in this kind of open endgame position. So it was a nice finish by Maxime, and overall, I think he played great today.
He played great, and also the final move, rook g4, is truly amazing and can be the topic of the puzzle chess puzzle looks very, very impressive by Maxime. By this win, he became leader of his group, Group D. We were looking forward to have a leader for 3 days in a row, but today in the round 4, he scored a point with black pieces, and this was the game, and this was your rapid recap of the day. All these draws means that we don't have any changes in the groups. Let's very quickly take a look that I am correct saying that, but we do have a very big update in the Group D, and Maxime is now leading this group with a half point ahead of Mamedyarov and Yu Yonggi.